Hey, my name is Zinnia, and on the day of my wedding, I watched my mother smile as she sold me. The ballroom sparkled like a crystal cage. Faces I barely knew surrounded me, dressed in silk and pretense, sipping champagne, clapping politely as though the last act of a Broadway tragedy had just ended. In many ways, it had. My mother stood center stage, elegant in her gunmetal gray gown, raising her flute for a toast. Her diamonds caught the light. Her voice caught the room. "To my daughter Zinnia," she said with a bright, brittle smile. "She's always had a flair for the dramatic, but tonight, she's finally learned her place." Laughter, scattered, unsure, then quickly swallowed by silence. "Marrying Jack may not be what she envisioned," she added, tilting her head toward my new husband. "But we all know she's better off grounded, with someone humble, someone real." I blinked. The words didn't feel like an insult at first, more like static in my ears, until the weight of their meaning settled in. My mother had just told 200 people that I had married beneath me, because I didn't deserve any better. In that moment, I saw her clearly. The woman who raised me to be ornamental, obedient, photogenic. The woman who trimmed my voice down to pleasantries and pressed my dreams flat under the weight of social expectation. Something inside me cracked. But not like glass, like a dam. I stepped forward before anyone else could speak. Jack's eyes widened. My father looked down at his cufflinks. I took the mic from my mother's hand. She didn't resist. She didn't think I'd actually say anything. She didn't know me at all. "You're right," I said, my voice steady and cruelly calm. "This wasn't what I envisioned." The room was so quiet, I could hear the AC humming above. What I envisioned was a life where I made my own choices, where I wasn't used as currency to patch holes in a sinking reputation. Somewhere in the crowd, a glass clinked too hard against a plate. A cough. The press of whispered scandal. But here I am, dressed like a bride, married to a man I barely know, to protect a family that's never protected me. My mother's eyes sharpened like glass. She moved toward me, but I held up my hand. "No," I said. "You had your speech. This is mine." "Hey, my name is Zinnia, and on the day of my wedding, I watched my mother smile as she sold me." The ballroom sparkled like a crystal cage. Faces I barely knew surrounded me, dressed in silk and pretense, sipping champagne, clapping politely as though the last act of a Broadway tragedy had just ended. In many ways, it had. My mother stood center stage, elegant in her gunmetal gray gown, raising her flute for a toast. Her diamonds caught the light. Her voice caught the room. "To my daughter Zinnia," she said with a bright, brittle smile. "She's always had a flair for the dramatic, but tonight, she's finally learned her place." Laughter, scattered, unsure, then quickly swallowed by silence. "Marrying Jack may not be what she envisioned," she added, tilting her head toward my new husband. "But we all know she's better off grounded, with someone humble, someone real." I blinked. The words didn't feel like an insult at first, more like static in my ears, until the weight of their meaning settled in. My mother had just told 200 people that I had married beneath me, because I didn't deserve any better. In that moment, I saw her clearly. The woman who raised me to be ornamental, obedient, photogenic. The woman who trimmed my voice down to pleasantries and pressed my dreams flat under the weight of social expectation. Something inside me cracked. But not like glass, like a dam. I stepped forward before anyone else could speak. Jack's eyes widened. My father looked down at his cufflinks. I took the mic from my mother's hand. She didn't resist. She didn't think I'd actually say anything. She didn't know me at all. "You're right," I said, my voice steady and cruelly calm. "This wasn't what I envisioned." The room was so quiet, I could hear the AC humming above. What I envisioned was a life where I made my own choices, where I wasn't used as currency to patch holes in a sinking reputation. Somewhere in the crowd, a glass clinked too hard against a plate. A cough. The press of whispered scandal. But here I am, dressed like a bride, married to a man I barely know, to protect a family that's never protected me. My mother's eyes sharpened like glass. She moved toward me, but I held up my hand. No, I said. You had your speech. This is mine. I turned to the crowd. I didn't fall in love. I fell in line. For years. I was obedient. I was good. I let myself become the version of me they could stomach. But today, I realized. I paused, my voice catching. Then I smiled. And it wasn't sweet. I don't owe anyone here a performance. Then I let the mic fall. The sound echoed, crisp and final, as it bounced off the parquet floor. I didn't wait to see their reactions. I walked out, not fast, not trembling, just done. The cold evening air outside hit me like absolution. I walked straight past the valet, past the guests sneaking cigarettes under string lights, past Jack, who had followed me halfway but stopped short. His voice called my name once. I didn't answer. He wasn't the enemy, but he hadn't stopped them either. That was the thing about Jack. He was agreeable, adaptable, trained. I used to think that was kindness. Now I see it for what it was. Complicity in a prettier suit. My heels clicked along the pavement. Somewhere in the distance, I could hear jazz playing from a bar. Life happening. My life waiting. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't run. I walked. Like I was just now learning how to move for myself. I remembered something my art teacher once told me, before I was forced to quit painting and get into finance like a real Langston. People always think silence means surrender, she said. But silence can be thunder if you hold it long enough. That night, my silence thundered across every corner of that ballroom. And though I left with nothing but the dress on my back and the taste of regret in my mouth, I felt taller than I ever had before. Some lines, once crossed, don't lead you back home. They lead you to yourself. Have you ever realized too late what your silence cost you? The air inside my apartment felt too clean, too quiet. The kind of silence that echoed your own thoughts back at you like an interrogation room. I sat on the edge of my bed, still in my wedding dress, half unzipped, the neckline slightly stained from champagne. I hadn't planned to come back here. But once I'd stormed out of the hotel ballroom, this was the only place that still felt remotely mine. I looked like the bride in a crime scene photo. Not dead. Just done. I stared at myself in the mirror. Not for vanity. God knows my mother had extracted every ounce of joy from mirrors. But to look myself in the eye for the first time in years. You wanted this, didn't you? I asked the reflection. She didn't answer. It started years ago, really. The version of me they sculpted, polished, groomed. I was the Langston girl who never raised her voice, wore neutral tones, studied finance instead of painting, dated men who could afford to misbehave, and said thank you, even when being offered a cage disguised as opportunity. My mother, Elizabeth, didn't teach me love. She taught me optics. You don't have to like the script, she'd once said. You just have to hit your marks. When I was 16, I got my first gallery invitation. My watercolor had won a statewide competition. I was electric, eyes wide, hands stained with paint, high on validation that wasn't filtered through family name or legacy. I showed her the letter, my fingers trembling from excitement. She read it once, then again, then neatly folded it and slid it into her purse. You're not going, she said calmly. Artists are replaceable. Langstons are not. She didn't yell. She didn't threaten. She just erased my future like a chalkboard. That night, I painted for hours in secret. The next morning, my paints were gone. Donated, she said. Just like that. So I became what they needed. Not because I forgot who I was, but because I was convinced being me wouldn't be enough. The day after the wedding, I woke to dozens of missed calls. Jack, my mother, my father. Some from people I hadn't spoken to in years, but who now felt entitled to an explanation for my meltdown. Elizabeth's voicemail was the one that caught me. Zinnia, I understand you're upset, But drama only gives people a story they'll twist. Come home, let's clean this up. You don't want to make this bigger than it already is. She didn't say, "Are you okay?" She didn't say, "I'm sorry." She said, "Let's clean this up." As if I were another smear on the carpet of her reputation. I deleted the message without flinching. Then I poured a coffee, sat at my desk, and opened an old locked file labeled Good Girl. Inside were PDFs, photos, receipts, voice notes, things I'd collected over the years but never dared confront. Jack had always seemed too convenient, too willing, too placed. I found a photo of him from 5 years ago. Same smile, different woman. My father in the background. I clicked through an email chain my assistant had helped me gather months ago, back when I'd first felt the tremors under my perfectly curated life. There were wire transfers from Langston Capital to a startup firm, one that Jack had interned at during college. Then, a quiet $100,000 investment in his current company, days before he reconnected with me, by chance, at a charity gala. He hadn't just married me. He'd been positioned. That night, I invited him over. He looked surprised when I texted, "Need to talk, come alone." When he arrived, he was wearing that same gentle expression, the one that made strangers trust him instantly. I didn't let him speak first. "How long have you known my parents were buying your loyalty?" His eyes shifted. "Zin, don't call me that." He exhaled, long and slow. "It wasn't like that, not at first." I stared. "But later." "Later, they made it very clear that if I didn't play along, certain things about my past might resurface. Things that could ruin my mother's medical license." That hit me like a slap, because I knew what it meant. Elizabeth never threatened people directly. She just made you feel like she could ruin you, and that was enough. "So you sold yourself," I said quietly. "And me, along with it." He stepped forward, his voice softer. "Zinnia, You don't love me. You don't even know me. You loved the version of me they handed you." Silence. Then he whispered, "I didn't know how to leave. Now you do." After he left, I opened my laptop again. The Good Girl file felt heavier now. I started building a timeline, a map, connections between money, people, reputations, each thread leading back to my parents. This wasn't just about me anymore. It never had been. I was a pawn in a larger game, a tool to launder not just wealth, but image. And I was done being useful. Ever felt like someone rehearsed your life for you before you even showed up? I never believed in ghosts. But that morning, my mother's voice in my head was the closest I'd come to being haunted. "You'll thank us later," it repeated as I watched the cursor blink on the screen, hovering over a spreadsheet I'd built during a storm of adrenaline the night before. Years of obedience had made me fluent in their language. Contracts, shell companies, donations with strings attached. I just never thought I'd turn that fluency against them. My coffee had gone cold. I didn't notice. Each transaction linked to Jack was clearer now. Nothing happened by accident. Not his presence at that gala, not the charity project we, coincidentally, shared 6 months later. Not the carefully orchestrated press attention around our engagement. They'd built the road I walked on, smoothed it, directed the lighting, all while pretending I had chosen the route. I took the elevator down to the private storage unit beneath my building. The keypad still recognized my code. A silent blessing. I hadn't been here since I boxed up my studio life. Canvases wrapped in brown paper, a paint-stained apron still stiff with dry color, a sketchbook labeled July. Before everything. I opened the box labeled Legal. It held every document I had stubbornly collected over the years, even after being warned to leave that kind of work to the lawyers. Inside was a signed lease agreement from when I helped Jack rent his first space for his company. He had asked me to co-sign, said it was just a technicality. I hadn't thought twice. I had the credit. He had the smile. But the co-signer clause wasn't the whole story. What I hadn't seen then, and what now stared back at me like a confession, was a clause tying the lease to Langston Trust. Quietly, buried in the fine print, which meant the company was never truly his. It had always been partially ours, or rather, my mother's. God! I muttered aloud. They gave me a husband they already owned. I met with an old friend for lunch that afternoon, Lucia, an ex-corporate analyst turned freelance investigator. She'd left the world we both grew up in, name cards and cocktail armor, for something rougher but freer. She wore leather and conviction now. "You look like someone about to burn something down," she said, sliding into the booth across from me. "Not burn," I replied. "Expose." Lucia raised an eyebrow. "You're finally pulling the thread." "No," I said. "I'm unraveling the whole damn fabric." I told her everything about Jack, the staged courtship, the money trail, the silence my parents had engineered into every decision. Her face didn't show surprise, just a slow, sad understanding. "You want my help," she said, tapping her coffee cup. "That's why you called?" "I want someone who can show me where the bodies are buried," I said, "and help me make sure no one else gets buried there again." That night, Lucia sent me a drive. Inside, encrypted documents, board memos, investor reports. My parents weren't just laundering money through the trust. They were leveraging my name to secure silent partnerships that bought them immunity. I was the brand, the human face on every philanthropic effort. They'd sold my integrity. My image was the soft edge to their hard greed. One file made my breath catch. Julian Langston Settlement 2019 PDF. My brother, the golden boy. I opened it, heart hammering. A settlement was paid to a woman in 2019, discreetly handled through Langston Capital. No name, just a reference. Former staff, housekeeper. I remembered her, Yvette. Kind eyes, left without notice. I stared at the signature. It wasn't Julian's. It was Elizabeth's. "You covered it up," I whispered to the screen. "You always cleaned the blood before anyone smelled it." The next morning, I confronted my father. He was alone at the country club, drinking his usual neat scotch before noon. "We need to talk," I said, sliding into the booth across from him. He blinked once, then said, "Zinnia, I was wondering when you'd show." His voice was calm. He had always been the cooler half of their operation, Elizabeth's velvet glove. "Did you know?" I asked. "I know many things," he said slowly, "but I've learned it's better not to speak unless you're absolutely certain it will change something." "That's not wisdom, that's cowardice." He looked at me then, really looked, like he saw me clearly for the first time, not as his daughter, not as his obligation, but as a threat. "You've always been too sensitive for this world," he said, "and you've always been too quiet for a man who watched it burn." He didn't answer. "Yvette didn't deserve what happened to her, and I'm not going to be your shield anymore." I stood. He didn't follow. When I got home, a new envelope was waiting at my door. No return address. Inside, a photo of me from years ago, laughing, unaware, caught mid-motion on the beach with my old art mentor. On the back, in black ink, "He didn't drown, he was disappeared. Ask your mother about Edric." My blood turned cold. Edric, the man who taught me light and shadow, who disappeared the week I dropped out of my art program. They'd told me he moved to Europe, just up and left. Another lie, another ghost. And suddenly, I realized, I hadn't even begun to uncover the real cost of their empire. What if the worst secrets are the ones we stopped asking about? The note with Edric's name haunted me for 3 nights. I didn't sleep. I didn't paint. I didn't answer Jack's texts or Lucia's follow-up calls. I just sat there, in my kitchen, replaying the last day I'd seen Edric, the man who taught me how to see the world, not just paint it. He wore linen shirts and smelled faintly of turpentine. He once said art wasn't a thing you made, it was a thing you lived. And then, just like that, he vanished. I'd believed the story. Paris. a new studio, a fresh start. I'd even told myself it made sense. He was too brilliant for this city, too free for our circles. But now, the idea that my mother had anything to do with his disappearance felt like swallowing glass. And worse, that I hadn't asked more questions. That's what scared me the most. How easily I'd let her silence become mine. Lucia came over the morning I finally opened the letter again. I hadn't called her. She just showed up, holding 2 coffees and a hard look on her face. "You're either going to implode," she said, "or make a move. Pick one." I handed her the note. She read it, then read it again. "Edric?" she asked, jaw tightening. "Zinnia, this is—" I know. He was the only adult who ever saw me without a filter. My parents hated that. Lucia pulled out her laptop. "Okay, let's find him. Or what's left of him." 3 hours later, we found a clue. Not a record. Not a social media trail. Just a property sale. One quietly processed by a holding company 6 months after Edric's supposed departure. The buyer? Langston Holdings. "They bought his studio," Lucia said, voice flat. "They erased him." I stood. My knees buckled slightly. They didn't just want to silence me. They wanted to erase everything that could make me independent. "Or dangerous," Lucia added. "He was teaching you how to think." Which is the one thing Elizabeth Langston will never forgive. That night, I visited my mother's house. Not the public mansion in Westchester, the real house. The one she kept private. The one she called her retreat, where press was never allowed. A lakefront estate surrounded by fencing and foliage that screamed, "We have secrets here." I didn't ring the bell. I still had my key. She was sitting in her garden room, nursing a glass of white wine, reading a first edition like she hadn't orchestrated years of strategic emotional terrorism. "Zinnia," she said, not surprised. I wondered when the ghost would knock. "What happened to Edric?" Her gaze didn't flinch. "He was interfering. It became a liability. He left. Simple." "He didn't leave. You made him disappear." "Don't be theatrical. We bought his building. We offered him a chance to go quietly. He accepted." "Did he?" Silence. Then she sighed. "You were too attached. He made you weak. He made me strong." She stood, placing the glass on the sill. "You don't understand what power looks like. You think it's about art and speeches. It's not. It's survival, legacy." I stepped closer. "No. Power is knowing the truth and choosing not to become you." Something in her twitched, just a hairline crack in that porcelain mask. "You think you're above all this?" she hissed. "Without us, you'd be nothing. And yet here I am, ruining your script." I left without slamming the door. That would have been a reaction. I wanted her to sit in the stillness of it, the knowledge that I wasn't hers anymore. I met Jack 2 nights later, in the same cafe, where we'd pretended to fall in love. He looked tired, like someone who had tried too long to be the good man in a bad story. "Why now?" he asked. "Why this war?" "Because it was never just about me. They've hurt people, destroyed them, and they used me to do it. So what do you want? Their empire to rot from the inside. And me? I want you to testify, to back me." Jack swallowed hard. "If I do, my mother loses her job. They'll come for my sister. You know how this works. Then help me do it smart, quiet, legal. You've seen how they work. I need leverage." He nodded slowly. "I'm in. But if I go down, I'm taking them with me." "So will I." A week later, Lucia and I had a working map. Nonprofits, shell donations, real estate laundering, silent settlements. And Edric's name appeared again, once, as a witness in a case that never went to trial. They buried more than his art. I filed my first anonymous complaint to the state attorney's office that night. Clean, documented, backed by real estate records and transfer logs. The war had begun, but it would be silent. No explosions, just careful erosion. The kind of slow collapse that leaves people wondering how they never saw it coming. Have you ever realized you weren't paranoid, just early? The morning the story broke, I was already awake. Not from nerves, from resolve. The anonymous tip I submitted to the state attorney's office had made its way to an investigative journalist, someone Lucia had quietly nudged. The article wasn't explosive by nature. It was surgical, clean. The kind of report that didn't scream scandal. It whispered credibility. And those whispers spread like fire through circles that fed on reputation. The headline was simple: Whispers Behind the Charities. Inside the Langston legacy, no accusations, just questions. Names of foundations, traces of money, public filings that didn't quite add up. No blood, yet, but enough to send tremors through every boardroom my mother had ever stepped into. That was the strategy, not fireworks, fractures, the kind of damage that made people start asking, "What else don't we know?" Lucia called 20 minutes after the article went live. "You should check your inbox." I opened it. One new message. From Elizabeth Langston, subject: "We need to talk." I stared at it. Didn't reply. At noon, I arrived at the Langston Foundation's annual luncheon. It was being held at the Meridian, one of Manhattan's most exclusive clubs, where the floors gleamed like intention and the walls whispered pedigree. My attendance hadn't been confirmed, but I knew my name would still be on the guest list. It always was. Image mattered more than presence. As I entered, eyes turned. Half smiles greeted me, tight and uncertain. No one dared ask, "Did you leak it?" Not yet. My mother stood near the stage, poised and polished in navy silk. When she saw me, something flickered behind her expression. Not rage, not fear, calculation. "You look tired," she said. "You look nervous." She didn't blink. "I want to speak with you, alone." I'm done having conversations that leave no record. Then stay. Listen to what I say publicly. I've heard enough speeches, Mother. Then be prepared, because you're not the only one with leverage. I leaned in, close enough for only her to hear. Then use it. Burn me. But you won't be the only one who gets smoke in her lungs. For the first time in months, her face faltered. I sat in the back as she took the stage. She delivered her address with usual precision. Philanthropy, legacy, community. But I saw it. The hesitation in her tone. The faint edge of strain when she mentioned integrity. Then came the surprise. "In light of recent inquiries," she said, "Langston Foundation will undergo a voluntary audit. Full transparency." Applause. Tentative. Confused. She had moved first. Smart. A preemptive play to control the narrative. But I wasn't playing anymore. I was dismantling the board. Later that afternoon, Jack met me in the park. He wore a gray coat and that same quiet guilt he'd carried since the night of our wedding. "They called me," he said. "Your mother. She wants to offer me an NDA and relocation." "Did you take it?" "No, but it's tempting." "You think that makes you noble?" "No, but it means I'm still here, for now." I looked at him, the man I might have loved in a life where none of this had been staged. "You were always good at surviving." "So are you." "I'm tired of surviving. I want to matter." "Then burn it all." "Not burn," I said. "Dismantle, quietly, like pulling thread from a sweater until it falls apart in your hands." Lucia texted me later that evening. One name, Sebastian Frost, a lawyer. Private. Specialized in asset tracing and white-collar litigation. Retained twice by the Langston family to handle sensitive issues. What Lucia found, though, was more than documents. It was a video, a deposition, never filed, of a former Langston staffer alleging fraud in a multi-million-dollar land development deal. The man. Gone. Case? Settled out of court. But the video survived, and now it was in my hands. This is the match," I told Lucia. "Strike it carefully." No, I said. Let them smell the sulfur. That weekend, I released the video anonymously to 3 people: a journalist, a board member of the Langston Foundation, and the Attorney General's Chief of Staff. No commentary, no demands, just the truth. By Monday morning, my family's name wasn't whispered. It was trending. What's louder than a scream? A truth no one can unhear. I watched them fall from a distance. That was the plan. No press conference, no public monologue. I didn't want to be the face of their downfall. I just wanted to be nowhere near the wreckage when the dust settled. 3 board members stepped down from the Langston Foundation. 2 sponsors pulled funding. A third issued a statement about reassessing associations. Elizabeth, of course, didn't flinch publicly. She always knew how to smile in flames. But I had something she didn't. I had left before the collapse. My lease ended 2 days after the video went viral. I let it expire. Packed only what fit in the back of Lucia's car: old sketchbooks, one worn suitcase, and a photograph of me and Edric in front of a mural we never finished. Lucia didn't ask questions, just drove. North. Through the mountains, past the noise. We ended up in a town so small the gas station doubled as the post office. The cottage we rented sat on the edge of a lake that mirrored the sky too well. I didn't need more space. I needed stillness. An air that hadn't been bought. You look like someone trying to remember who she was before she became someone else, Lucia said, handing me coffee one morning. I don't think I want to remember, I replied. I think I want to begin. I painted again. Not for money, not for show, for breath. My hands trembled at first, like they didn't believe I had permission. But over time, they found rhythm again. Brush to canvas, thought to form. Color returned like a slow confession. I didn't paint people, not yet. But I painted water, trees, shadows, things that existed without needing applause. One afternoon, I got a letter. Handwritten, no return address. Inside, a pressed violet and a note. You didn't burn them. You made them burn themselves. Thank you for leaving before they pulled you under. There was no signature. But I recognized the script. Jack. We hadn't spoken since the release. I didn't need to. He had made his choice. Not in words, but in absence. In not showing up at the Langston house. In not signing the NDA. In disappearing. I had respected that. We weren't a love story. We were a lesson. I opened my own gallery 6 months later. Not in the city. Here. In a place where people asked, how? Before they asked who. I called it unfinished. Because that's what I was. Not broken, not perfect. Just still becoming. The first exhibition wasn't advertised. No PR. Just a handwritten note on the door. If you've ever been told you were too much, too loud, too wrong, you belong here. We sold out in 2 days. Not because I was a Langston, but because I wasn't anymore. The day Elizabeth finally called, I let it go to voicemail. Her voice, sharp, tired, cut through. I read what they're saying about us. If you think you've won anything, Zinnia, you haven't. You've just broken what kept us afloat. Pause. Come home, let's clean this up. I listened once, then deleted it. I didn't need closure. I needed peace. And peace doesn't ask you to return to where the wound was made. The twist wasn't that I exposed them. It was that I survived them without becoming them. Ever walked away not to escape, but to return to yourself? The morning before the gallery's 1-year anniversary, I found myself standing in front of a blank canvas. No expectations, no theme, just space. It was the first time in a long while I wasn't painting toward anything. No opening night, no message, no hidden burn beneath the brush. It felt strange, like staring into a mirror after forgetting your own face. I stood there for almost an hour before lifting the brush. I didn't paint a scene, or a memory. I painted a fracture, a single jagged line across white space, barely visible, but deliberate. It wasn't about what broke, it was about what remained. Later that afternoon, I hosted a private talk for local women artists. No media, just folding chairs, warm light, and raw voices. We didn't talk about branding or networking. We talked about being interrupted, about being expected to smile through discomfort, about how control often wears the mask of care. One woman asked, "Do you ever regret not destroying them completely?" I paused. "No," I said. "I regret not leaving sooner. Not because I needed to escape them, but because I needed to find out who I was when I wasn't being edited." Someone in the back nodded slowly, then whispered, "That's it." That night, I walked through the gallery alone, each piece hung with intention. Not perfection, intention. There was a self-portrait in the back room, not a traditional one. It was a silhouette standing in the rain, arms wide open, not drowning, not pleading. Just existing. I hadn't labeled it, but people called it resurfaced. I got a letter the next morning. Another one. Different handwriting. This one was from Julian. I saw the deposition. I know what she covered for. I didn't ask her to, but I didn't stop her either. "You were always stronger than me. I see that now. I don't expect forgiveness, just clarity. Maybe that's what this is." Julian. I didn't cry. I just folded it neatly and placed it next to the one from Jack. Ghosts don't always haunt. Sometimes they confess. A week later, I returned to the city. Not to reclaim anything, not to confront anyone. I came for a student exhibit at a community center Edric had once supported. They'd dedicated the studio to his memory. Turns out someone, somewhere, kept his light alive. The plaque read, "To Edric Bales, who believed in seeing, not just looking." I stayed until everyone left. Then I stood in the quiet room, surrounded by sketches and sculpture, and struggle turned into shape. Lucia joined me later. "This feel like closure?" she asked. "No," I said. "It feels like opening a door instead of slamming one." "Think you'll ever go back?" "To them? No, but to myself? Every day." She smiled. "Good. You're worth visiting." I wrote something on the gallery wall before we left. Just a line, tucked into the corner. "If you've made it through what was meant to break you, leave something behind. A name, a story, a mark. So we know we're not alone. This wasn't revenge. This wasn't rebellion. This was reclamation. Not loud, not cinematic, but real. And if you've ever felt like you didn't belong to the life they wrote for you, maybe it's time to pick up the pen. If you've ever survived something meant to silence you, maybe you were the echo they feared most. They say healing isn't linear, but no one tells you it's also not quiet. Not the kind that stays tucked between journal pages or whispered in therapy rooms. Real healing, the kind that rewires your very sense of belonging, echoes. It rattles. It reappears in the mundane. The way you say no, without apology. The way you hold eye contact. The way you return to a room you once left in pieces. A year had passed since the deposition went public. Since I let the mic drop on a family that once defined me. And it was only now, standing in the basement of the Community Archive Center, that I realized what I'd truly done. I had rewritten the script. The archive was Lucia's idea. She called me one morning in January. Wind howled in the background like a ghost she wasn't afraid of. "We've been collecting broken stories," she said. "But what if we curated them?" Curated them? Yeah, not for pity, for permanence. What if your story, and stories like it, weren't just whispered to close friends and therapists? What if they had a place to exist? I was silent for a moment. "You mean like a vault?" "No, a living room, one with shelves." That's how the Archive of Voices began. The space wasn't glamorous. Cement floors, brick walls, one flickering exit sign. But that was the point. We weren't interested in polish. We wanted presence. People mailed in stories, drawings, songs, voice memos, anything that captured a truth they hadn't been allowed to say out loud. Every submission got logged, not graded, not corrected, just accepted. One wall was dedicated entirely to the theme, "What almost broke you but didn't." On it hung letters like confessions. "They told me to keep it in the family," So I left the family. He said I was lucky he stayed. I got luckier when he left. They thought silence would make me loyal. It made me louder. I cried the first night I read them, not because they were sad, because they were mine too. One afternoon, I got a visit I didn't expect. Not Jack, not Julian, Elizabeth. She walked in like someone rehearsing a scene she wasn't sure she still had the lead role in. Her coat was perfect. Her hair, deliberate. But her eyes carried something I hadn't seen in years. Doubt. "You've done well," she said, scanning the space. "Didn't think you'd build something." "That's because you only ever saw me as a reflection of you." She looked away. "I came to ask." "No," I said. "Don't ask. Just look." I handed her one of the archived letters. She read it. Slowly. Her hands didn't tremble, but I saw the inhale she tried to hide. "Did you write this?" "No, but I could have." Silence hung between us. "Is this what you wanted?" she asked finally. "To become a martyr?" "No," I replied. "To become me." "And what does that mean now?" "It means I don't need you to understand, or approve, or remember birthdays. It means I don't need anything you're not willing to give without strings." She hesitated. "I thought you hated me." "I did," I said, "but I don't carry it anymore. Hate keeps you bound. I'm free now. That's worse, isn't it?" She left without another word. And I didn't watch her go. Months passed. We expanded the archive, added workshops, hired local artists to mentor girls who had been told they were too much. I no longer craved applause, but I did cherish connection. And that was new. On the anniversary of the Langston Foundation's collapse, a young girl came up to me after a panel, maybe 16, maybe shy, maybe holding back years of words she'd never said. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Of course." "What if I'm not brave?" I knelt so we were eye level. "You don't have to be brave," I said. "You just have to be honest. Start there. Bravery will follow." She nodded. And I knew then, the archive wasn't about me. It never was. It was about echo. What you whisper once becomes the permission someone else needs to shout. Later that night, I stood alone again. This time, not afraid. I placed one last note on the wall. My own. I thought this would be the end. It wasn't. It was the start of something softer, louder, freer. So if you're reading this, maybe you're not broken. Maybe you're breaking out. If this story reminded you of something you were told to forget, maybe it's time to write it down. Looking back, I don't see a story about revenge. I see a story about release, about choosing truth over comfort and self-worth over legacy. I learned that walking away doesn't mean giving up. It means choosing to no longer live on someone else's terms. If you've ever been made to feel small, silenced, or reshaped for someone else's approval, please hear this. You are not too much. You are not hard to love. You were just in the wrong room. What would you rebuild if no one told you who you had to be? If this story touched you, let me know where you're watching from, or share your thoughts in the comments. And if it didn't connect with you, I'd still love to hear why. If you're here right now, take a second. Subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the next story.